Greetings and salutations, everyone. I do hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to the second half. Before we jump into it, a couple quick links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click the bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment and share the video. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help this channel to continue to grow and go. They definitely do matter, and they are appreciated. And with that, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to tonight's second half, shall we? I end up getting in touch with a gentleman by the name of Wynn, and he is 67 years old. He's actually a researcher, and he's been researching not cryptids, but legends and mythology of North America for quite some time. And he had heard the experience, or a couple of different experiences that I talked about with Mount Shasta, one being the team of Marines that had gone up there and taken out a supposed Nephilim, and the other with the young man named Kirk, who had been camping and somehow from his tent ended up waking up in an underground kind of laboratory or facility in Mount Shasta, where he saw what he believes to be some sort of angelic creature in chains and in the form of a cross, to what he also believes to be Nephilim or mountain giants, whatever you want to call them, and some other creatures, Bigfoot, Dogman, and such, all in these kind of almost like a zoo, where he walked down this hallway after having to deal with whatever kind of race these aliens were, maybe Lemurian or whatnot. So he had heard that, and he wanted to let me know. He said, listen, I know 100% that what everyone says about Mount Shasta is more than likely factual. And I was like, well, I talked to these guys, and I got a good feeling out of them. I didn't feel any kind of made up BS from them. And he says, well, in 1981, him and a small team of researchers, he actually at one point in his life was a college professor, and on ancient studies and such. I'm not going to share the college that he taught at, but a few geologists and a couple of kind of regular folk, his friends who were not geologists, were not professors or academics or any kind of, but just interested in what this trip was going to entail and what they were going to look for. So he had heard in the late 70s about a kind of stone circle or stone, not structure, but some kind of monument, a small monument, not large in the sky, but large, wide in width, on Mount Shasta, somewhere. And apparently, supposedly, the legend states that it is the grave site or grave sites of Nephilim, supposedly 4. And I have never heard of this. I did a little research, and sure enough, there's a couple old articles talking about it. So that's what they were trying to find. And they didn't know exactly where it was. They had a pretty decent idea of where it may have been. So they brought the geologist, on top of being his friend, Wynn's friend. They wanted someone there that could identify whatever these rocks were. Mount Shasta is a volcano. It has not erupted for, I believe, like 3,600 years or something like that. So that's why he was adamant about having a team on top of his friends or regular laymen like myself and, other people who don't have academic studies and such, but do research, So it was the spring of 1981, and they had started this trip. They actually started their trip through the forest of Mount Shasta, or Shasta National Forest, and started driving through. They had done a lot of research about in depth on some of the ancient Native American tribes that had been up there. And supposedly, just like Mount Katahdin, the Native American tribes in that area believe that the creator lives on Mount Shasta somewhere as well, which very interesting. And they wanted to check out a few places in that area. Now, he's quite adamant about there being multiple species of cryptid in Mount Shasta region. Obviously, we know this because there's been numerous accounts. Brad had gone hiking and shot at a Bigfoot on Mount Shasta or in that region. So, and people have spotted dogmen, giant, whatnot. I believe crawlers, and I believe I've heard of experiences with glimmermen, or those predator-like creatures, which the more you look at portals and dimensional travel, good possibility these kind of glimmer men, I don't really like that name, but good possibility that these creatures have come from these portals, and quite possibly their genetic makeup has been changed going through those portals. I don't know, just an idea. They get into the Mount Shasta region, and they had planned to do a 2-week excursion. They had some funding behind them, private funding, and apparently he had known a gentleman who was fairly wealthy and wanted, if they did find this grave site of the giants, he wanted one of the skeletons for his own personal collection. He said, I don't care what you do with the other 3. give them to a college, give them to the Smithsonian, but I want, and I will fund you partially. So they were funded. They end up getting to this location called Pluto's Cave, which is a very large lava tube on the outskirts of Mount Shasta. What they were going to do is they were going to kind of set up camp for a couple days in different areas and look in and around these areas for this circle of giants. I guess that's what he called it, the giant cemetery or giant. There's no real name for it. It's just a large circular structure, and supposedly, like I said, a cemetery for giants. So one of his friends, who not an academic, they had been hiking out and about for a couple hours, just looking for any kind of remnant or whatever. They did have an idea of looking into some of these lava tubes in and around Mount Shasta, just maybe because, hey, what if it's not on the surface, but what if it's just below in one of these kind of tunnels or whatever? Apparently, they are like day 4, and a gentleman and his friend proceed to look into one of these lava tubes. They start hiking in. They have these really poor flashlights compared to what we have nowadays. But they were decent for back then. They weren't, run-of-the-mill kind of Kmart flashlights that you could get back then. These were fairly decent, he said. This gentleman had started to walk into this lava tube, and they didn't hear any kind of noise, but they had this really strange kind of feeling and almost like shivers going right up their spine and throughout their body, cold chills. And it wasn't that cold of a day to where even going into this tunnel or tube, because I guess there's humid air coming out of these tubes as well, which he said that. So I've never been, so I don't know. I'm just going off of what he shared with me. So he gets this really bad, weird feeling. There's no kind of noise from a predator or anything. The wildlife outside is going on like normal. And he starts walking, and his friend started talking to him. And as his friend started to get a little louder, in front of them at a distance, they saw a set of kind of reddish, yellowish eyes kind of glowing in the distance, in the darkness of this tunnel. They stop. He's got his flashlight. He shines it in, and it's not illuminating the tunnel that far, but they can see where these eyes are by the glow of them. His friend then says something like, what do you think that is? And as he makes that statement a little louder, there's another set of eyes that lights up, and then another and another, to where there was 4 sets of eyes that had lit up. And immediately, as these eyes start lighting up, there are growls, loud, deep growls. And both guys, being not academic, but not being kind of like the average kind of Joe. They'd been in the woods hiking, they grew up in the wildlife. That they enjoy being out there. That's why they went on this trip, on top of doing some research, being interested in it all. I guess the guy that had told Wynn this immediately says it sounds like a wolf's growl or a canine growl. It definitely doesn't sound like a bear. But I've never seen any kind of wolf have glowing orange, kind of red hellfired eyes. And he said what they did was, now they can see these eyes start to come forth, and they're now backing away. They're not going to turn their back. They're just backpedaling slowly so they don't trip. But they're keeping a good distance from these approaching eyes and not turning their back. As these eyes kind of cross this whatever, there's another 2 sets behind it. Now they see 6 sets of glowing orange, red, hellfired eyes. And 2 of these large, what he said looked like grayish black wolves. And he said the paws were just enormous. They were like pie tins. And they had walked out. The other 4 sets of eyes were still in the darkness where they couldn't make out any detail. But obviously they knew that if this is what those eyes are from, those other 4 are probably the same thing. So now they are backpedaling and walking more. They can start to feel the outside to their back. So they know they're getting closer to the entrance of this lava tube. And as these 2 wolves start walking up, there's almost kind of no transition. They just start walking and stand up. There was no popping, there was no kind of any transition. It was just almost they took a step, and as they were taking that step, walking with their front paws, they just stood. And they started to walk bipedally towards these 2 men. And they are still, as these dogmen or whatever are walking toward them, they are still walking backward. But because these guys have to be careful of, possibly tripping on any kind of this ancient lava rock material, they couldn't go that fast. So they are now gaining a little bit of distance onto them. And they then hit the outside. So they are at the entrance of this lava tunnel. And they now know that behind them, if they were to turn and run, it was a downhill, still consisting of that lava-like material, that ancient whatever rock. And that's immediately what they did. And as he turns to run, he looks over his shoulder. And he said to Wynn, Wynn, it was like we had gotten out of that tunnel or that tube. And it was almost like those 2 that were walking up at us, the second they hit the opening or the exit of that tube, it was almost like there was a invisible kind of barrier, because they both stopped almost side by side and stared at us as we turned and started running down this hill for our lives. He just continued to watch over his shoulder as he's running. They hit the ground and they just take off. And he did check a couple different times to see, because you don't run from a predator, but if they are not following you and you do have a good shot, I mean, why the hell not, right? So they end up getting to their campsite. Both guys, they're out of breath, and they immediately start to tell Wynn and a few of the other guys that are at the campsite, setting up, talking about, what the plan of the action is going to be, where they are going to go next to see, what they can find. And these guys come out of the woods just out of breath, pale white, and not screaming, but not quiet, and saying, we just saw what looked like werewolves inside of, Pluto's cave, that lava tube that we were going to check out. There was at least 6 of these creatures. We visibly only made eye contact with 2, but there were 4 other sets of eye shine, same color and almost same height, when they were walking quadruped. And that's what caught Wynn. Wynn's like, wait, when they were walking quadruped? And he said, yeah, they stood up at a certain point and proceeded to walk us out of that cave. They came to the entrance / exit of that cave, and they didn't cross that barrier. There was not, obviously there may have been, but there wasn't a visible barrier. They didn't cross. It was almost like they were pushing them out of that tunnel or tube. And Wynn starts jotting this down. He's, they're all researching this. They want to get as much information and as much evidence documented as possible. So he sits with both guys. Give me a description, this, and that. And like I said, these paws, when they were walking, were as big as like a 9-inch pie tin. They were just huge, he said. And when they stood up, it was almost effortlessly. It was just, and they were up and walking. And the eye contact did not stop. They didn't look down. They didn't look around or up. The eyes were just on them as they were quadruped to biped, and pushed them out of that cave. The 2 guys finally calmed down. The day moves forth. This didn't happen late in the afternoon. It was actually fairly early in the afternoon or late morning. So throughout the day, they did talk about it periodically, but calmed down. Maybe it was something, that played, maybe our eyes played tricks on us in the cave. Maybe, who knows, rationally trying to come up with something so they don't get so scared where they want to leave. Once again, Wynn documents all of this. And one of the geologists who is actually a fairly accomplished Bigfoot researcher, jotted a lot of this down as well. And they kind of do their own thing throughout the day, do a little bit of investigating, do a little bit of navigational markings and such, to where, this is where we heard it might be. Let's check it out here. You obviously didn't go as deep into Pluto's cavern or cave as you wanted to. But judging on how scared these guys are, let's not risk it. Let's push on from there. So the day just goes smooth and smooth, and these guys don't forget about it, but they kind of just, if they felt like if these things were to want to get them, it would have gotten them. In the cave, it could have, both of them could have easily overpowered and just quickly taken control of the situation of the two guys. And they, proceeded to have dinner. It is once again spring, so daylight is starting to last a little longer. Not too long, but we're talking 7:30, 8 o'clock, and it's starting to get dark. So they end up having dinner. They're sitting by the fire. Mind you, there is no alcoholic beverages. And all of these people, even the ones that don't work in college facilities or as geologists or whatever, all of them are taking this so serious to where they don't have the need or want to, this isn't a party for anybody. This is a research trip, a funded research trip by someone who has invested money and ideas to Win and his friends to get him one of these giant skeletons. So dinner is done. They finally decide, hey, it's getting late. Let's get an early jump on the morning. We'll break down camp. We'll start heading a little deeper out. But let's kind of crash out. And everybody agrees because, they're getting tired. They've been walking all day. They've been doing stuff all day. And what else are you going to do? You're going to rest and do more research. So everyone is now fast asleep. There's 5 tents, 2 men to a tent, and the night is peaceful. Wynn remembers kind of waking up that evening. For some reason, he woke up and the sound of nature kind of immediately calmed him again. He started to think about, finding this grave of these Nephilim and such. And, but he started to think a little bit about what had happened with the 2 guys. Did that have something to do with, what they're after? Started to think about Native American lore, the Native American tribes that once lived in this area. Could it have possibly had, some sort of... And he just starts to doze off again. And all of a sudden, there are these just howls just all around their little campsite. And their campsite, there was 5 tents. They kind of in a U shape. And they had their fire. And then they had this area of where they were eating and storing food up in the trees and such. So it was like these howls were coming from behind the tents, and it didn't seem like they were in front. But they were essentially surrounded, and they could hear movement through the woods, bipedal running. Some at one point was quadruped, but he believes to this day still that the majority of the footfall that he had heard was bipedal. They do have some firearms with them for protection, And he yells out as he's lying in his tent listening to this noise. He yells out, "Hey, who's up?" And a few of the guys sound off like, "I am, da-da-da, what the hell is that? I am, what's that?" And he makes a statement, "Lock and load, boys, just in case, lock and load." So they're all lying there listening to these noises, and they weren't getting any closer to them. As they're moving through the woods, they're not pushing forward. They're just staying in a central location away from the campsite. And they're just laying there listening. And he said, one of the guys that was kind of a professional tracker / hunter, he would guide people in the area, in different states and such. He was a professional guide. He said, if any of these get too close to our tents, remember that you can't crossfire. You don't want to kill your friend. But if something hits your tent, call out. If there is no answer, shoot. If you have to touch somebody's tent and someone calls out, respond back so you don't get shot. So that is the plan. And everybody is lying in their tent or now sitting. And Wynn asked the question, should we get out of our tent and hold, stand our ground? The guide said, not wise. Let's just play this by ear. And that's what they did. There was no contact with the tents, but they could hear now. It was almost like they got daring after they started to communicate with each other. These footfalls running now through their camp, close to their tents, but there was still no physical contact to any of their gear that was outside, anything. It was just they were running through and being mischievous. That's what it seemed. A short period later, they do start hearing the growls and quadruped walking. They all lay there. The noise stops. Everything just goes dead quiet, immediate dead silence. The howling stops, the running stops. Prior to the howling, Wynn said it happened so quick. It was like I was lulled to bed with the noise of nature. I was almost out, but then this noise just, started. So, next morning they get out and they are in soil where, you could see visible foot tracks from your friends, yourself, whatever. So that's what they started to do. They're looking through the camp and they're like, I know something ran by my tent. I'm making I'm making footsteps in this kind of sandy, acidic soil. Are you guys seeing anything? And no. It's like nothing happened. There was no scuff, nothing. And so they kind of chalk it up. Once again, Wynn documents this in his notes and such, because his whole idea is if they do make contact or find this stone circle of the giants, this kind of resting place of them, that, there's a plan. So they're looking and there's nothing. And they're like, all right, let's pack up. We'll go to the next location. We'll start doing some research in that location. And that's what they did. And they moved forward. And now they are noticeably a little bit apprehensive about going too deep. And one of the geologists says, if they were going to get us, they would have gotten us last night. No one felt like they were being watched. No one had any kind of strange feeling of, whatever. So they get to the next area. They hiked only a couple miles, maybe 5 miles max. And this was a location that a Native American elder had told them, check this area out. You will notice it by rocks that look like mushrooms. And they did. They used that as a map marker, or whatever you want to call it. And Wynn and a few of his buddies make note of it, because they all are taking notes. Some aren't, some are. But what the main thing is to take notes and compare with each other what went down. They get to this location, and the old man who told them about this old Native American practitioner of magic, a shaman, but not an evil one, or a black magic shaman, greets them and tells them, this is the area where you should find supposedly our ancestors from thousands of years ago. Their bones were found intermixed with these giant skeletons. So you should have luck here. And they set up camp, proceed to look. Everyone's still apprehensive about the near attack that happened. And Wynn said near attack because, looking back at it now, if those creatures had wanted to attack them, there was no way anyone was getting out alive, even with their firearms. 2 men in a tent, 5 tents, all the doors facing to this open area, and they would have been screwed. So they get up to this area, they set camp up, and they decide, all right, this doesn't feel like the right location, but there's that marker, a huge stone-like mushroom, and should we take some looks around and see if we can find this circular gravestone of the giants? No. Yeah. All right. Some guys say no. Wynn and his few friends say, yeah, let's do it. Or, let's rest today. Take the night, get camp set up, spend a couple of days here, and we've got 2 more areas to go before our trip is over, 2 week, whatever. They set up camp, and the night was smooth. There was no noise. Or I shouldn't say no noise. There was only nature. There was no howling. There was no growls. There was no running at all. But the spot still didn't feel like Wynn and his few closest researchers that were documenting all this said, this just doesn't feel like the spot. One, it's arid here. It's fucking kind of, there's not a lot of grass or a lot of trees where we are. But what if there was thousands of years ago when these bones were buried? Let's just, take tonight and then tomorrow morning we'll take a walk around, all of us, and look and see. Total bust that, and they have to move forward to go to the second to last spot. As they're getting to that second to last spot, one of the guys that's with them falls deathly ill. He starts to vomit, and his stomach is just terrible. No one can explain it because they've all eaten the same food. They did ask, hey, did you eat a berry, or did you eat something that you shouldn't have? And he's like, no, I'm just fucking, my gut kills, my head hurts. He's thrown up, and it's just terrible. Like it's almost like he's got food poisoning. When said, all right, let's get him rested, and we'll figure this out. He's just getting sicker and sicker and sicker. They go to bed, and nothing at all happens. The sick guy wakes up the next morning, almost like 100%. He's still feeling a little off, but no worse for wear. They decide, all right, let's get to this one area on Shasta where we at least know the majority of, this weird shit happens. So they get set up. They do start to look, and one of the geologists comes back and says, we found something that I think you need to look at. And so they all kind of converge to this area. And this is the second to last spot. And there's a lot of excitement because, hey, if this is the area, we still have a whole other week to figure out if this is it, get the, evidence out, the funding, one skeleton goes to the funder, and we'll figure out the rest, but we'll notify the right people too. But not rat out the guy that paid for everything. So they're looking at this area, and sure enough, it looks like a man-made circle, rather large. And the geologist, as he and another geologist that they work side by side together, and they know when and have for a while. He makes note of this rock here isn't a rock that would be naturally occurring on Mount Shasta or in California, at that matter. This is, something that would be in, Europe or, and he doesn't remember the exact name of the stone they were looking at because it it wasn't what they were looking for. So that was not documented. Hey, we found whatever kind of rock and thought that we were in it to win it at this point, but they didn't, and so Wynn and another guy start to kind of dig in this immediate circled area, and there's nothing. They kind of laugh, hey, we should have listened to you, but we didn't. But, better safe than sorry. So for that night, obviously they realized, hey, this is not the spot. The next 3 days, they hike and 3 nights camp because they are now trudging up to where their last kind of location that they want to look at is. And nothing happens, obviously, in those couple of days getting to this final location. They get to the area where it's pinned to, they have it marked in this map. Obviously, GPS doesn't exist, so they have a map, and they're like, it should be right here. This is the last place that we know of that all of our research has pointed us to. It could have been any of the 4, but this is the last, so it's gotta be. They get there and they set up camp, and Wynn realizes that, hey, something's really, really off with everybody. They're really close to Sulphur Spring, and, they had gone up where Kirk had gone. He had gone from behind Mount Shasta up. Wynn and his group went kind of from south to north, where Kirk on his solo trip went north to south. So they get there and they're set up, but he realizes in him and the geologist, his best friend, who actually taught at the college that he taught at, realizes that, hey, there's a lot of kind of animosity, a lot of hostility between everybody here. A trip that we have all known each other and we have all agreed, this is something we're all going to do together. But, people are spouting off at each other very quick to dismiss and everything. And so he's taking notice to this because, everybody's at each other's throat. And he's like, I wonder if, this has anything to do with us being at the right spot. Maybe some sort of Native American, not curse, but whatever, curse, doesn't want us here. Maybe there's something ancient here that does not want us here. So it's kind of causing this drama or aggression for each other. And they have a talk and they're like, check this out. We've all been really calm, really peaceful, except when you got sick, everybody took care of you. But does anybody else notice that where we are right now is the last location that we should be finding these skeletons? But we are all at each other's throats. So and as soon as they start talking about it, they realize, hey, we may be where we need to be. And they calm down. They all talk, calm down, set up camp. And they decide that, all right, we believe that this location is going to be due north. And ironically enough, where that aggression occurred was about a mile from where Kirk had set his camp up and woke up underground. And so they all do agree, hey, it was weird. Let's calm down. And the next morning, nothing happens that night. They eat dinner. They do go to bed fairly early because there is excitement. Let's get, the jump on this. Let's find this. And that gives us time to, do everything that we need to do. My cat is walking around somewhere I can hear him. So, boom, they go to bed, they get up, and they all converge to this one location. And it's where there's this kind of very strange, I'm looking at the map right now of where he said it was. He gave me the exact coordinates of it. And it's not a tube, but it's this very kind of deep kind of bowl. And that's what tipped them off that this may be the location, because supposedly it's a circle, the circle of the giants, this cemetery where there's bones. So they get there and they're looking around, they're testing things, they're looking at things. Everything's really calm. There is no aggression. There is no animosity. Like the whole mood got changed. And one of the guys starts screaming. And they start looking around. They're like, who is that? Who? And they all sound off, ... And sure enough, one of the geologists that didn't teach with Wynn at the college, but knew his friend who was a teacher and geologist, he wasn't with everybody. And they're like, it has to be him screaming. Where is he? Let's follow the scream. Let's yell out for him. And that's what they do. They're yelling out, hey, where are you? Da, da, da. There's no response. There's just a scream like, help me, help me. But they visually cannot see him. There's nothing. They can't see him, but they can hear him like he's right there. They keep walking, and we're in this area. And one of the guys says, come here, come here. They all run over. And where he's standing, he said, feel this. Feel this. And right as he said, feel this, help me, just right there, like an invisible boom right there. And he puts his hand out to grab his friend, because he should be right here. This is where the noise is coming from. And as he puts his hands out to feel, it's daylight, he he gets these like kind of tremors, like these like almost like he got electrocuted, but he wasn't. It just kind of this pulse kind of zapped him back. And they all look at him and they're like, "Are you all right?" Because he's on his ass. And he's like, "Just stand where I was and put your hands right where I did." And sure enough, everyone in the group did, except the guy that's screaming, "Help me," who was with the group. They're like, "What the fuck is, going on? We can't leave him. We've got to find him. He's got to be here. What is this?" And they start to walk around. One of the guys actually, where they put their hands, walks straight through, and they see him like kind of tremor. His whole body starts to tremor. And Wynn said, "I got this feeling like he was going to just disappear. Like there was something there, but I just felt like he was going to, if he proceeded to walk any further, he would join our other friend. But we've got to find him." And he's shaking and he's walking still, and he walks 10, 15 more steps, and he stops shaking and he turns and he looks at everybody. And he said what he could see, he said, "When?" And, they could visibly see him. But when he's looking back out at them, and he just, he's only 20 feet away from these guys. He said, "I can see these just like aura of blues and greens. And I can see you guys, but it looks like everything's so far away. And I know how close I am to you guys right now." And he said, "I can't hear our other friend screaming. Can you guys still hear him?" And Wynn's like, "No, hang on. And he tells a few of the guys, "Go around this way. Me and the other geologists are going to walk through here. And, let's see if anyone has any of these tremors." They walk through, and how he described it was not at all like being electrocuted or whatever. It was just this kind of soul shaking feeling, like this just unexplainable. So they get across and they join their friend, and they look back to where they had just been standing. And sure enough, there's just these weird, it's not a mist, but just light, like almost like a refraction or reflection or whatever. Yeah, refraction would be the light changing. The two other guys that went around that area are now standing with them, and they're like, "We don't see anything. What are you talking about? There's nothing there except 20 feet away is, where we just were. We don't see any weird colors or any kind of shaking, and we didn't have any shaking. Are you sure you're not making this up?" And right there just kind of pisses everybody off again. And everybody just starts, yelling at each other. "What are you talking about? Making it up. We're looking for, our friend. What the hell? Why would we?" And as they're yelling at each other and screaming, and Wynn said, "I felt like it was going to get real violent real quick. It was different than a couple of days ago. This was, everyone was heated. People were upset.
And all of a sudden, they're all talking and look over, because they're standing here and they look over, and there's their friend, the other geologist, and he's lying horizontally in the air, like 5 feet off of the ground, just lying there flat. And they see his body, like it almost looked like someone had picked his arms up, because his arms kind of, went, and he sat up, and he moved his legs. So he's like, it was almost like he was on a table, an invisible table. And they're like, what is going on? Our friend is here. What is going on with him though? And he's got his legs out. So he's sitting at an angle like this, and he just falls forward. And when he hits the ground, he wakes up, and he's like, what the hell just happened? And they're like, we couldn't find you for like 20 minutes. Do you remember anything that happened? And he's like, no. He's like, I clueless of what's going on right now. Why am I on the ground? Why is my face hurt? Because I just face planted, in these volcanic rock debris and sand and just kind of a desert-like terrain. And they all start talking to him. Wynn and the other geologists are like, tell us what happened. And he's like, I don't know. He's like, I walked in this area. He goes, and all of a sudden, he goes, I get, this pulsates me, boom. And he said, I seen these people, these humans. I was laying on this table, and these humans were talking to me. And he's like, they said they weren't going to hurt me. But they were just doing these like scans over my body. And then they said, all right, it's time for you to leave. And they picked me up because I was kind of out of it. And he said, the next thing I know, I thought I was, whatever, but I'm on the ground. And at that point, Wynn's like, there's a portal, or there's a vortex. There's something right here. This has got to be the spot. This has got to be the spot. They all start to kind of walk through that area again, but there's no any kind of vibration or anything. They kind of loop around, go through, and nothing. He's still kind of out of it, but not really. And they were like, all right, that sounded like you were abducted right in front of us, but there was no UFOs. And Wynn starts to realize, like, the Native American tribe that believed their creator was on Mount Shasta, they talked about kind of like these tunnels and stuff that, aliens or these very light-skinned, blonde-haired humanoids that were very tall, much taller than lived. You went through one of these fucking portals, and Wynn's like, let's start digging. This is it. They all kind of calm down, and probably no more than a couple of hours go by, and except the one guy who had just, they start looking and pushing dirt around, digging, looking for any kind of evidence of these bones or any kind of evidence of these rocks in this circular design, because they are sitting once again in a bowl. All this occurred like in this centralized location, and nothing. Starting to get dark, and they're like, we got a couple more nights, let's camp, and then we'll hit it in the morning. We'll get it done. We'll get everything done. They're all sound asleep after dinner and everything. Their friend, who he still to this day believes got abducted, is just lying there. He's in shock. And they kind of figure everything out. They're like, all right, we've got to figure out where these skeleton remains are. We know there's a portal. We know there's some sort of vibration. That only leads us to knowing where we're on the right location. We're in the right spot. They get up the next morning and they get to that location after breakfast, coffee. And as they're walking, they hear voices. And they're like, what the hell? You know, maybe it's these aliens that abducted our friend. They get to this bowled out area of the mountain, and there are 4 guys up there, and they greet Wynn and the friends, and you know, how are you? And they're like, yeah, we're working with the state of California. What we are doing is we are working on kind of a topographical map of Mount Shasta. We'd appreciate it if you not be here today. They have all these like kind of devices that measure land and whatever. What I guess, what are they called? Surveyors have. So all these devices are placed around. But and as they're talking to these guys, they notice that all of the 4 men have firearms, have sidearms on them. And Wynn makes that statement like, so you work with the government of California, and, you know, do you normally carry a pistol with you when you're doing surveying and such? And one of the guys says, yeah, we do. But I don't think that's any of your business. You know, maybe it's time for you and your crew to leave. And the guy's very rude to him. And Wynn doesn't say anything. And they kind of talk to their friends. And he looks back and he sees the 4 guys start talking. And all of a sudden, there's an earthquake. And I looked it up, and there was an earthquake in 81 on this day in this area of California. Just this huge, powerful earthquake erupts, and they all kind of stop and look at each other. And the guys that are doing the map, whatever, they say, you know, it's time for you guys to drag your ass. You know, we do have permission to be up here, and we were told that if anyone is up here, that we are to escort them out, and we do have that power behind us, you know, federal government, whatever. So pack your shit and go. And they decide, you know, hey, let's call it. Let's call it. Something bad's going to happen. You know, the first thing We were in this cave. These fucking dogmen came out at us. People have had fights, like at each other's throats. Something just happened to our very good friend who is, a geologist, the other geologist. And now these guys are here. This is only telling us that, we're here. We're not about to have a shootout with these guys. And if they are federal government agents, go to prison for the rest of our lives. So they pack up all their stuff and they can't pack it up and head back out. Wynn gets to his home and tells the guy that funded everything, this is exactly what happened. I do believe 100% that in that bold area on Mount Shasta by Sulphur Springs is where the bodies of these Nephilim lie and where the circle of the giants is. And the guy says, all right, are you going to go and check it out later? How is this going to work? Do we need to pay you money? Or you can just exclusively work for me, Wynn, and go up after, your friends are all done. And that's what he does. He decides to work for this guy and start to go up into Mount Shasta region alone looking for this, and he never finds it. He never ever found it. Lore has been that, according to the older Native American tribes that were out there that have long since been gone, that this area has been sacred for, thousands and thousands of years. And there were giants there, but we don't bother them there. That is their area. And every time he went back up there, he couldn't find that dome or that bowled out area of the ground. He'd be standing right where he knew he was, but never find it again. And he is convinced 100% that the government and these alien agenda people work hand in hand to keep the secrets. But why are they so concerned about hiding those bodies on Mount Shasta in this area? If there wasn't, anything there, why would these guys be so adamant to push them away? And it never made sense to him to this day. He's convinced that the dogmen are used as a protection device. It's insane. I feel so bad for this guy, Wynn, because he dedicated so much of his life to just find this circle of the giants, this cemetery, and never could. But he truly believes that the government works with these aliens to hide it all, and that there's something deeper going on. Like, how did his friend disappear, reappear like he was on a table and being physically moved like a parent would with a child if there was nothing there? And his friend's description of what he saw while he was, semi-conscious. It's unbelievably, sad for him. Dogmen used as weapons. truly believes it. Experimentation on humans. He was convinced at one time after he stopped working for this guy that he would be taken care of, taken out by the federal government. And it's just, it's so sad because he's dedicated his whole life to try to find this area. And it's something I'd never heard of. I mean, I'm sorry that there wasn't, some fucking shootout between everybody, but that's not how it went down for him. And to dedicate 20, 30 more years of his life to try and find the evidence, his friend never requested the funding back or anything. So, just sad.
And there you have it, folks. I hope you all enjoyed tonight's second half as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that helps this channel to continue to grow and go, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. Everyone is simply treated with the respect that we deserve. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. These events have happened. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless you all.